folks, if you believe the world's economy is a sound, solid structure, you are an idiot. And I mean that in the kindest way possible. But seriously, the entirety of our economy is a Ponzi scheme. And anyone with half a brain who spends about 15 minutes thinking about it will agree. And the Ponzi scheme is beginning to show some cracks. First, we had people losing their homes and savings because they were buying up crap they couldn't afford. Then we had governments bailing out banks and corporations. Now we have governments bailing out other governments. We perpetually finance the present with the promise of the future's prosperity. It's insane. At some point, the buck passing has to stop. As Nouriel Roubini, a noted economist, recently said, there's not going to be anyone coming from Mars or the moon to bail out the IMF or the Eurozone. The way our Ponzi scheme works is, we have this horrible system that centers on an ever-growing population that produces and consumes ever more stuff. And that's how Ponzi schemes work, right? Keep finding more and more suckers to fund the scheme to keep everything afloat. And you can keep the scheme alive. So long as the future remains full of new consumers, we'll be fine. But we live in interesting times, my friends. And we're starting to face lowered fertility rates in developing countries and a growing aging population. Take Europe, for example. The last period for which UN data showed Europe's total fertility rate above the replacement rate was in the 70s. And as the recession continues, people are reproducing less and less. In the US, the birth rate fell to its lowest level in modern history in 2011. And before you start thinking, well, just look at the Chinese, there are a billion of them, we clearly don't have a fertility problem. Let me cut you off right there and tell you that fertility rates in China are lower than those in Europe. The birth rate in China currently is 1.55, well below the fertility rate of 2.1 or more, which is what is needed to keep a population growing. It's about replacement. We just aren't making enough new people. So in the future, we are going to have fewer people consuming less and needing fewer resources. And having fewer people around to consume less crap is very, very bad for our Ponzi scheme economy. That scheme requires more suckers to keep buying into the scheme, and we're making fewer suckers. But here's the silver lining. Having fewer people around consuming less and not feeding into a Ponzi scheme is ultimately better. It would be very good for the planet, obviously, and also for people like me who could use a little more elbow room on the subway. It would be awesome if society stopped stealing from its future self, sucking dry the legacy of humankind. The trick is for people to figure out a way to opt out of the Ponzi scheme without opting out of society entirely. And that involves figuring out a way to cut out the banks and politicians, finding ways to provide ourselves with our own sources of energy. Number one, that's most important. And also finding ways to feed and clothe ourselves and interact with each other without relying on the people running the scheme. And if that doesn't happen, sooner or later, the sham of our economy is going to crash, just like every Ponzi scheme before it. Tonight, let's talk about that by following me on Twitter @TheResident.